We also have the emergence of the Dharma Sutras and the Dharma Shastras being, composed by the Brahmins, which laid down the norms for society in general and kings in particular, how kings should behave, how they should take care of their people, and so on. Now, Magad was first among the 16 Mahajanapadas. So, there were some reasons why Magad emerged as the most powerful of the 16 Mahajanapadas. First cause could be productive agriculture. Now, Magad was located in close to the Brahmaputra Delta, and of course along the Ganga Valley. We know that this is the most fertile region of India even today. So, a highly productive agriculture meant that a lot of resources could be raised to actually create a standing army. Magad was the first Mahajanapad to have a standing professional army. So, agricultural taxation was a very important means of creating such an army. Elephants are also found in plenty in this region, and elephants were really the tanks of the ancient and medieval armies. I mean, any army which had a large number of elephants was considered to be almost undefeatable. Magad region also has a lot of iron mines in the Jharkhand region. Now, iron was the mainstay of the economy in the 6th century BC. Iron was very useful for not only making tools but also for weapons, which would give an edge to the Magadhan army over other armies surrounding them. Cheap and fast means of transport over riverine routes was also a very key factor, because the Magadhans could move their armies up and down the rivers across their kingdoms extremely rapidly. And also, cheap means of transportation also meant that they would have a very lively trade as well. And trade also brought in huge amounts of revenue, which again could be pumped into creating these very powerful standing armies. And another reason that the Buddhist and Jain texts tell us about is that Magad also had a quick succession of ruthlessly ambitious kings. So each of these kings also played a huge role in making sure that Magad emerged as the most powerful of all the 16 Mahajanapads. Magad's first capital was Rajagaha, which was later then shifted to Pataliputra. Now, what are our sources of information about the Mauryas? Now, we have two major categories of sources: archaeological sources, and the second one is literary sources. Now, under archaeological sources, we have a huge range of sources. So, we have epigraphy, or the study of inscriptions, from where we get to know about Ashoka's Dhamma, and what kind of progressive policies that he had for his people, and of course, very importantly, land grants as well, which gave us a glimpse into the economic life and economic structuring of large parts of India. Another very important archaeological evidence is the study of coins or numismatics. As we shall see later in this discussion, that studying the study of numismatics was an extremely important method of trying to rediscover India's ancient past. Among archaeological remains, you may also mention sculptures, some remains of buildings, tools, pottery, and so on and so forth. We will be referring to some of them later in the revision module. We now come to the literary sources. Again, a huge variety of literary sources, which can be further subcategorized as religious and secular. So, under religious texts, you have Jain and Buddhist and Brahmanical texts. And under secular texts, you have the Arthashastra written by Kautilya, which gives us a glimpse into the administration of the Mauryan Empire. And also, most importantly, Megasthenes' Indica. Of course, the book as a whole does not exist anymore, but many other authors quoted from the Indica, and this is how we've gotten to know what Megasthenes thought about India in general. We now come to administration of the empire. Now, both Arthashastra and Megasthenes' Indica provide the base of our understanding of administration in the Mauryan Empire. So, what we get to know is that there were five major political centers which were carefully chosen. These were Patliputra, which was the capital of Magad across many dynasties, Takshila in the northwestern part of India, which was also part of the Silk Route, Ujjaini, which was again a very important city along the overland trade route which led to the southern part of India, Toshali, and Suvarnagiri. Now, Suvarnagiri was in the southern Deccan, where you have the Karnataka gold mines. So perhaps Suvarnagiri was also carefully chosen because of its proximity to gold mines. Uh, when we look at Ashokan inscriptions, we see the same inscriptions scattered across the subcontinent. But given the primitive means of transport and communication, most scholars today agree that the extent of the empire might have been quite large, but it was not a centralized empire. There had to be some decentralization. Perhaps administration was strongest in and around these five political centers. But as you moved away from these centers, perhaps imperial control weakened. Now, Megasthenes' Indica mentions, among a lot of other things, six subcommittees for coordinating just military activities. So there was one committee organizing the navy, another to organize transport and provisions. This was, of course, a very varied committee because it had to look at, different means of transportation to be provided, how to procure food, servants and craftsmen and all to, fulfill the requirements of a large moving army. There was the third subcommittee looked after the needs of the foot soldiers. The fourth one looked after horses and procurement of horses. Then there was another committee to look after chariots, building them, repairing them, and so on. And the final committee looked after the procurement and care of elephants of the Magadhan army. Now let's come to Ashoka's Dhamma. Now, when we look at Ashokan inscriptions and we try to figure out the principles of his Dhamma, they were pretty simple and they were universally applicable. For example, he talks about respecting parents, practicing non-violence. So this is something which would be universally applicable to anyone. Yes, also something like uh, tolerance towards people who do not follow the same religious values as you do. um, then most of these principles were geared towards ensuring the well-being of the people. Ashoka in his inscriptions also talks about special officers that he had appointed called Dhamma Mahamatta, who would go from city to city, from village to village, and spread the message of his Dhamma. Now, how important was this concept of the empire? Now, in the 18th and 19th centuries, when not just the British scholars but also Indian scholars were looking at India's past, the idea of a large empire was very exciting, especially in the context of the fact that when the British colonialists were telling us that we were unsuitable for ruling ourselves, and which is why the British had come to civilize us. So when you discover an empire as large as Ashoka's, and his benevolent rule over his empire, it sort of gave the Indian nationalists a chance to find a hero, and reply to the colonial historiography and say that no, we also had a very well established system of administration and benevolent despotism, and it was not all chaos as the British were telling us at that time. Archaeological finds that were emerging right now, especially Ashoka's pillar inscriptions, which were highly polished and works of art, or the stupas, they were extremely refined and artistically beautiful. So that also gave the nationalist historians, a chance to argue that India's past was very glorious. The modern empire only lasted 150 years. I mean, 150 years seems like a long time to you and me, but when you look at the entire extent of Indian history, 150 years is a very short time. Also, the modern empire did not encompass the whole of India. It was only during Ashoka's reign that large parts of the subcontinent were brought under his rule. But then again, the extreme northeast and extreme south were never really under the direct control of Ashoka. So, really, in political terms, perhaps the modern empire does not have a lasting impact, but definitely the legacy in terms of organization of administration, of Ashoka's Dhamma, and the whole idea of an India-wide empire, that definitely left behind an interesting legacy. Let's now talk about the new notions of kingship. If we go to southern India, we see that we have a lot of chiefdoms and kingdoms in the southern part of the country, especially the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas in what is known as the ancient Tamilakam region. Now, Tamilakam included parts of southern Karnataka, in fact, even southern Maharashtra, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. We also have the Sangam texts, which form a very important source of information for the chiefs and the kings of southern India, especially when compositions from the Sangam text tell us about how rulers acquired and distributed wealth by raiding neighboring areas. The Shakas and Satvahanas were also important dynasties to rule in central and western India. Their origins were largely obscure, and not only them, but a lot of other dynasties, which were perhaps not Kshatriyas, they tried to claim legitimacy through various means. One of the most powerful ways to do that was to claim divine origin. Yes, so Kushanas would build these colossal statues, and they would identify with various deities by picking up titles like Devaputra, meaning the son of God. Guptas, of course, not only took up high sounding titles like Maharaja Adhiraj, but also gave land grants to Samantas, who were in turn loyal to the rulers. The kings also got prashastis composed for themselves. Prashastis were these, hyperbolic, high praise poems, which were composed by court poets of these kings. One of the most outstanding examples of prashastis is a Prayag Prashasti, which describes Samudragupta as one of the most powerful kings, who's equal to Indra, who's equal to Varuna, who's equal to Yama, the god of death, in his power, and he's rich as Kuber and so on, right? So these were different ways in which the kings were trying to claim legitimacy, especially if they had overthrown a previous dynasty and their own origins, were less than elite.